Is knitting design actually profitable or is it just a money pit? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtfully Made Fiber Blogcast. My name is Aimee Sher, and I am the host of this blogcast, as well as a knitting pattern designer, weaver, sewist. Kind of a jack of all trades fiber artist. I have here with me my friend and colleague Lauren Rad from A Bee in the Bonnet, and today we're going to deep dive into the hidden costs of knitting pattern design. Thanks for joining us, Lauren, today. It's always so good to talk to you, and I think today's topic is a bit of a spicy and contentious topic and can vary so much across designers. So it's really nice to have somebody who's an accessory designer here with us. For those who are new to our conversations, Lauren is primarily an accessories designer, and I'm primarily a garments designer. So, Lauren, do you want to get us started talking about what some of the costs of knitting pattern design that our viewers might not know about?
Sure. I think, before we get too deep into all of the many costs, it is worth remembering that you can run a knitting design business on a pretty shoestring budget. There are a lot of things that are helpful when you want to grow and scale, but you can do a lot of it fairly cost efficiently, which is definitely how I started out. I
Mhm.
had, a couple pieces of software, a couple,
Mhm.
platforms where I listed my pattern and had to pay listing fees, and that was kind of about it. And then as my business grew, the things that I needed to run the business grew and the expenses grew.
Yes, and they grow at a pace that it feels like kind of outpaces our income increase.
Sometimes.
So, Lauren, at which point do you feel like the knitting design costs started to pile up, and what were these kind of unexpected expenses that started to come up as your business grew?
Yeah, I think the first expense that I had not anticipated when I started my business, and that is a very constant expense, is tech editing. And I think if you're going to be running a good knitting design
Mhm.
business, you really do need to budget for tech editing. But because
Mhm.
tech editors generally don't post their prices on, like a price sheet on their
Mhm.
website, it can be hard
Yeah.
to anticipate what that cost might be. And the cost of tech editing is going to vary pretty significantly depending on how experienced your tech editor is, what they are
Mhm.
editing for you, where they live. There are all sorts of things that will factor into how your tech editor prices the cost of tech editing. But that I think is something that is kind of a constant throughout all design businesses and something that we really need to start thinking about as early as possible.
I think we have slightly different experiences with tech editing because you have a tech editor who, if I understand correctly, prices by the project, while I have only ever worked with tech editors who bill on an hourly basis. And for me, that started to snowball when I started to do more shape inclusive shaping and really kind of like drilling down on fit details and fit aesthetics and things like bust starts. That made my tech editing costs skyrocket so fast. So that might be a cost that people might not be aware about. Like size inclusivity is really important and a very hot topic. And there's always folks calling out designers for not having enough sizes, etc. But grading to an inclusive size range and then tech editing that grading can sometimes have really unexpected costs that designers may not be ready or willing to bear. And I think that's something that's kind of under discussed in that particular conversation because tech editing does cost a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Even though my socks are graded to 5 sizes, and I do really care about
Mhm.
size inclusivity in the garment sphere, or excuse me, in the accessory world too, which we don't talk about very much. There
That's
are,
right.
as we've talked about elsewhere, fewer points of variability within a sock. There's only so much that
Mhm.
you're doing on a sock that needs to be checked, even if you have 5 different sizes. And in a size inclusive garment, you have 9 at least different sizes. So you have more sizes that need to be checked. You have more measurements that need to be checked. Your front neck drop, your back neck drop, your shoulder, your sleeve length, your wrist
Mhm.
circumference, your hem length, your hem circumference. Like there's all these things
Yeah.
going on in there.
And
And
the
then once you
difference
start,
between the shoulder width and the body
yeah.
width starts to
Mm-hmm.
vary. So then there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of points of shaping differences and things like that. But
Yeah. And then when you
my
start
tech
adding
editor is
bust
Heather
darts too.
Storta. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
So my editor, Heather Storta, is a total champion. She is incredible.
I have
But
worked with Heather
some of my
before
more
when I designed for
complex
magazines, and she's amazing.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
It when my patterns get a little more complex, or if there's shaping that's complex on my end, like on the designer end, and we try to make it really simple for the user, of course, for the knitter. But while we're in the developmental stages, I had a pattern go up to 12 hours of tech editing. So at like 30 something dollars per hour, that ends up being really significant. And I know that in my first couple of years of knitting pattern design, I could not have graded that garment and tech edited that garment and then made a profit on it. I just could not have recouped it in those first couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges with making your knitting business profitable or your design business is you need to
Mhm,
know that there's the customer base there that will support the cost of
mhm,
these developmental things that you need to do in
mhm,
order to make a product that
mhm,
you're proud of. Because none of us wants to release a pattern that is
mhm,
below our standards or not inclusive to the point that we want it to be or is not carefully tech edited.
mhm.
And so
Yeah.
you do have to have that balance there of here's what I need to invest in the project to make sure that it is a product I am proud to put out there and to put my name on. And here are the number of
Mhm.
patterns that I need to sell in order to recoup that cost.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times designers, we undercount our time. Recently, I hired somebody to run my test knits just because I was doing so much in the yarn shop side of my shop and developing new yarns and things like that. So for my patterns, once they are tech edited for the first time, I send them to sample knitting, which is another cost that I have. And then once it's sample knit, we tech edit it again before we send it to test. And then from there on, my fantastic colleague Mia takes the reins and does all the test knitting stuff. And back when I did all my own sample knitting and did all my own testing, I did not pay myself enough because now that I have to pay somebody else a fair wage for these tasks, my design budget is something like $3,000 to $4,000 per garment. And if I'm selling my patterns at $8 to $9, which is typical for what I sell my patterns at, because so many people buy them on a discount, that's hundreds, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, like 500 or 600 pattern copies before I even begin to recoup. So it's pretty significant, and I know that not many designers are selling that many patterns ever. Certainly not when I started out. I was not selling that many patterns. So, um, yeah, as I scale, I realize how much I was underpaying myself before.
What are some of the other costs that you have encountered as your business grows?
Let's see. I think software has been really unexpectedly expensive. There's so much software. I draft all my designs in Microsoft Word just because it has more detailed tracking, like version tracking features that my tech editors and I like. And then I transfer it all into InDesign, which is on Adobe, and Adobe Creative is not cheap. I can tell you that. And then there's Ravelry fees. I sell my yarn and my patterns on Shopify. So then every month I think I pay about like $100 for that, something like that. And then there's my newsletter fees, Klaviyo, and I also pay over $100 for that per month. Now, my newsletter cost was not always that expensive. So if you're a knitter who's thinking about getting into knitting design, don't let that scare you off. It's gotten that expensive because I have more people in my newsletter now. So the cost of that goes up proportionally. Certainly, it was not like $150 when we started out. That would have been completely undoable for me starting out. But hopefully, as these costs go up, your revenue goes up too. Although I know that's not the case for everybody and not always the case even for myself. Like sometimes I have a month where the costs went up a ton, or there's like non-fixed costs, like one-time costs that cost a lot, and then suddenly I'm underwater. Things can happen. What about
Yeah.
you, Lauren? What are some of your unexpected software costs?
So I have a lot of the same costs. I still do all of my pattern layout in Microsoft Word. I just use columns and tables for the layout, and that
Yeah.
works fine. But I also, like you, I've got the newsletter costs. I have hosting costs for my website. So I know that's
hmm
included in your Shopify fees. I'm not on Shopify. So I
hmm
have a
Yeah.
WordPress website that I host on AWS. And so I've got that.
Mhm.
There's also the Google Business Suite for email, which I think you use as well
Oh,
for
yes.
not
I
sending
do,
out the
yeah.
newsletters, but other correspondence.
Oh my gosh. I
I'm trying to
have
think
like
of, oh,
5 seats on it. It's very expensive.
yeah. And there's also local business licensing fees. So things like,
Oh. Oh,
yeah, so
yes.
like,
Okay, yes.
yeah. So like your business license for your local municipality. And then I have an LLC. So I have an LLC fee that I pay to the state of California every year. All sorts of just like little things that you don't think of. So I also use Tailwind for scheduling my pins, and that has a
Mhm.
cost associated with it. There's Canva
Mhm.
for graphic design for, pins and social posts. I don't use a paid
Social
social
media
media scheduler
costs.
anymore, but I did.
Mhm.
So that's a cost that you might have. What else?
The studio cost.
Yeah.
I still have to pay the mortgage, but now a significant part of my, uh, square footage is dedicated to the space in which I have a little office and do my knitting, and I'll do all my calculations and all my desk work and things like that, and that's not counting the part that holds all my shop stuff. So
Yeah.
that can add up too.
Yeah, I took over a bedroom. It used to be our guest room. And then we decided,
Oh.
we only have guests maybe once or twice a year. And I was working in a little corner of our
Mhm.
bedroom and it was kind of spilling out
Oh.
everywhere. And that was just not
Yeah.
functional for us. And so it didn't make sense to have a bedroom sitting empty for, 360 nights a year when I could be using that for my office
Yeah.
space. So,
I think I learned that in 2020 when we were all stuck at home for a while, and like Roy was working on a couch and then I was working at a desk crammed in the corner of the living room next to that couch. And we were just together all the time, taking meetings, sometimes at the same time. And it got real hairy real quick. So then when we moved here to Missouri, we really made a conscious choice to have separate working spaces for each of
I
us.
think that's healthy for a lot of reasons. If it's
Mhm, yes.
possible, it's a good idea.
If it's possible, yes. Of course, when you're in Los Angeles and real estate is like all the way out there, um, that's a good that's a good seg into the fact that the costs are different depending on where you are. Like it's a lot more affordable for me to do what I do here in St. Louis than it was for me in Los Angeles. Like I still couldn't afford to live in Los Angeles and have my own working space.
Yeah, yeah. The cost of living where you are really does affect so much about your business
Mm,
because you have those
mhm,
costs of doing business that are kind of steady wherever you are. The newsletter program is
mhm,
going to cost what it costs.
mhm.
Tech editing is going to cost what it
Yeah,
costs. But then
yeah.
depending on where you live, your groceries might be more expensive or less expensive and your utilities might be more or
You need
less
to make
expensive.
more. You need to make more just to get by, and that may make the difference between whether it's a viable occupation.
What about the kind of physical, personal, unexpected costs? So you and I have both talked about how, we do a lot of our work while we are also doing parenting tasks. And so we're juggling a lot of those things.
Yeah.
How do you kind of
Mhm.
evaluate that cost for yourself?
Um, well, I could be in a career that's a lot higher paying, but then I'd be out of the house and never see my kids. I wouldn't be able to do the pickups the same. They would have to go into aftercare, and then I would have to do pickup like when it's already dark outside, things like that. So, in a way, I do think that overlapping and the ability to live my life and, stop for a few minutes to make a quick lunch, things like that improve my quality of life and kind of offsets uh kind of like the low pay and the high costs of needing pattern design. Um, and certainly I am not able to sustain my living just off of knitting pattern design. That's why I have a shop. I think many of us do have to have multiple streams of income or have a day job and of course, I think the unspoken part here in the United States is that many of us have a spouse who works in a traditional corporate job so that we can have health insurance.
Same here. There's no way I could afford to buy health insurance for our family with my income as a pattern designer.
No.
There's no way.
No, no, and I think that might be a cost that's US specific, so that's not the case everywhere, so if you're not in the US, that won't be a consideration for you, but it certainly is for us.
Anything
There's other
else?
costs associated for me too, like, for example, last year, I fell. I had a pretty serious fall while preparing for a show, just moving heavy things around, and I sprained my wrist pretty seriously, and it did not heal for 2 months. And aside from the sample knitting costs that I already mentioned before, which started to really balloon around that time, I realized that I cannot be sample knitting everything without hurting myself, even after I got better. There's also the cost of physical therapy and the occasional therapeutic massage for when things do crop up due to knitting intensively and on a deadline. So there's certainly like medical costs that are associated with knitting pattern design that I previously did not account for. So that's something we have to be careful about. There's like only so many garments I can knit in a year to try to release more patterns and make a living before it starts to really, like, not just in the time and in the space that it takes up in my life, but before it starts to negatively impact my body to a point where I can't do the other parts of my life that I already don't have enough time for due to scaling the business. So I think that these are all kind of confounding factors that work together sometimes and can get a little bit complicated.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't like when I started doing knitting pattern design, I didn't think of it as something that would take a physical toll. I think of things like
Mhm.
construction
Yeah.
work and being a firefighter
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
heavy machinery. Those are the things that have an effect on your body. And then after a
Mhm.
few years of knitting several hours a day, I realized, "Oh, I need to take care of these wrists." Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And we wanna be doing this hopefully a long time, so there's definitely a sense of, like, needing to preserve ourselves and make sure we have longevity in our life, not just in knitting. Right, so that really went off on, like, not a tangent, but that last like, the intangible stuff, the physical stuff, the physical costs is like, we can talk about that for a long time, and it's not something that you can put a dollar amount to. Like, how can you put a dollar cost on your health and on your physical well-being and ability to keep knitting well into our old age and things like that? So that's really that conversation took kind of an unexpected turn. Like, I wasn't expecting to talk about that, but that's really interesting. So thank you for bringing that up.
Planned on it either. It just kind of came up.
So, for those who are watching thus far and we haven't scared you away yet, have you ever thought about doing any kind of knitting pattern design? And do you think that it's still worth it after everything we talked about? And if you don't do knitting pattern design, what are the costs that we talked about that were maybe a little bit unexpected for you and that you're hearing about for the first time? We'd love to hear from you and hear all your thoughts about the costs of knitting pattern design. If you enjoyed this kind of video, Lauren and I do post every other week, rotating on her channel and mine. We talk about all things fiber arts. We talk about yarn, we talk about knitting, we talk about the behind the scenes of knitting pattern design like this episode. So if you're interested to see more of us gabbing and talking about all of these things, don't forget to subscribe to both of our channels. And we do have a little podcast playlist in the description box below if you'd like to check out the other episodes that we have so far. And of course, don't forget to like and share this video with anybody who you think might find it interesting. And I will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us, Lauren.
Glad to be here.